Tina proposed this show to me after it had been on display at the MOA, which is the Lancaster Museum of Art, working with Andy Campione, the curator there, who was actually the juror of our last Visual Arts Festival, so everything comes around full circle. You've always been inspired by your surroundings and outdoors. And you mentioned briefly the beginning of your art career and studying art, but did you always know you were going to be an artist?
Well, I always knew that art was a passion, and I knew that animals were a passion. And if you can find a way to make art, even if it's in the evenings or, early in the morning, it doesn't matter if you have to make a living out of it. But I was fortunate to make a living out of ceramics, which I was still painting animals, doing their eyes, decorating their necks with flowers and bows and what have you. So I can't say you have passions when you're young, and then if you can be able to live those passions as an adult, that's just an amazing experience. So I think I either wanted to be involved with animals as a trainer or as a painter, but I definitely wanted animals in the picture somehow, which they are now. Growing up, I was surrounded by animals. We lived in Idaho. We moved when I was about 8 to California, and I still had chickens, dogs, cats, birds, guinea pigs, hamsters, quail. We had everything. It was in the neighborhood. I was a neighboring parakeet, so I always had animals around me. And when I became an adult, I did have the ceramic business for 20 years. It was quite successful. And from there, that was kind of a fad. I made my transition to fine art at that point. I went back to school and learned a lot of great stuff from community colleges, and then I came back here and had some great instructors. And moving to Tehachapi exposed me to more of the wildlife animals, and that's when it really took off for me in art. I mean, I just became extremely passionate with the mountain lions, bears, wolves, anything. We don't have wolves in Tehachapi, but still just that outdoor wildlife surrounding. So I think that's when my art really took off for me.
Now, starting as a ceramicist, were there any influences or inspirations from outdoor whenever you were working with the medium or ceramic?
Not really. It was more of a survival mode. I needed to have a career. I needed to make money, and it was artistic, and so I just did it. It wasn't like I studied under anybody. I actually was self-taught for the most part. The ceramics I was doing was not high fire. It's basically pouring into molds, taking the animal out, a cat or a bunny, and put the pieces together, and then you decorate it like your cake decorating it. And I sold to high-end stores. I sold to Nordstrom's, Knott's Berry Farm, Disneyland, Nationwide. I had employees, so I did really quite well, but it was like cake decorating, so it was different.
So tell us about that shift from ceramics to oil, and then now your primary medium is watercolors.
Yeah, when I was doing ceramics, I still painted at night with my oils. I still painted portraits of dogs, cats, and what have you, but the oil is so, for me, it's very stiff, it's very controlling. You have to know where you're putting your mark. You have to know what everything is kind of like, you have a plan. I had a chance to submit 2 pieces to a gallery in Big Bear, and I decided to do watercolors, very small, and they accepted them on consignment, and they sold. And watercolors became the medium where you throw it down, and it does its thing, and then you work with it, and I love that. But as an oil painter, so many other artists will tell you or scare you off by playing around with that medium. And it's something that if you like to lose yourself a little bit and paint and have this medium take a little bit of the control from you, you'll love it. And I did. I fell in love with watercolors. I started painting from then on. I moved to Tehachapi. I sold quite a few pieces that I was painting on paper with watercolors. Of course, there were bears and wolves and that sort of stuff. But when I made the transition from watercolors on paper to watercolors on UPO, which is what these pieces are out there, that's when it really got fun. Because UPO takes it one step further. You have no control for the most part. You just kind of play with it, and then once it dries, you can kind of manipulate it a little bit. But it's just a fun medium to work with. So that's when I made my transition. Is when I found something that I could play with, and it surprised me every time I finished a piece.
I think one of the things more representational than others. The two piece that starts the hallway and the one that concludes the hallway are incredibly abstract.
Right.
Has that been a kind of a path that you've taken with your art? Is always balancing between abstraction and representation?
Well, the two pieces that border on the shows are probably my later works, so I would really like to go more abstract with them, but it does. I wanted the piece to be abstract, but then I want to center it with the eyes. So when I throw my colors down, I let it do its thing. It depends how much I want to control it back in.
Mm-hmm.
So as I paint more and more, I tend to like the looser feel of the paintings. I love to have it more abstract, but you know, sometimes you go too far and you just have this blob of colors and maybe two eyes poking out. Maybe people don't know if it's a cat or a dog or a bird or whatever. So it's just a balancing act. But I do like the abstract portion of it. I really want you to look through the painting and see the different forms and shapes. And if you see anything, it's not that I put anything in there intentionally, but I want you to look at it, and then I want you to go back to the eyes and then try to figure out what the piece is saying to you. So the abstract works with the eyes for me, and the eyes is what I really like painting. I spend a lot of time looking at these critters, at pictures, real life, and just trying to look into their eyes and see how the eyes are. And then with the watercolors, I get these accidents that happen, which then I can go in there and kind of fine tune just a little bit. But the accidents what makes the piece pop. Like there's a lot of weird stuff going on in that one, and I really didn't plan for about 90% of it. So it's just a little bit that I go in there and control.
So we're kind of starting to talk about you're starting to talk about your process. Let's talk about how you actually begin each piece.
Well, usually these are most of these are big pieces, 26 by 40. There's some smaller pieces in the show, but what I normally do is I set out 4 or 5 pieces, and they're flat. And I lightly sketch out what I want to do with each piece. So I kind of on the Yupo. Those are all done on Yupo. I do paint on canvas and I do paint with fluid acrylics, but these are Yupo.
Do you want to define Yupo paper?
Yupo is a synthetic paper, so it's like plastic. Paper absorbs watercolor paper. When you touch Yupo, it's shiny. It's just plastic. It's actually was used for sign companies.
Can you spell that?
It's YUPO.
So you can think about how watercolor, she talks about how it takes on a life of its own because it does not soak in.
It does not grab in.
It's like traditional watercolor.
Right, and there's terraskin, which is made out of stone, and it grabs a little bit more than Yupo, but it's still very slick. So that's another material that you can play with. If you don't like the real shiny, slick feeling of Yupo, you can go to terraskin. It's another art material for watercolors.
I have a question. Sorry, did you select the Yupo paper as a tool to allow your work to become more abstract, or was it an intentional? Is it something that you had to you have to let go a little bit, and do you allow the material to enforce that direction, or does that make?
Well, when I paint, I experiment with everything, and I did experiment with Yupo, and because it goes everywhere, it fits in with what I want to do. So it became the perfect, because watercolor or paper, if you want to take something out, you have to wait till it dries and you can kind of rub it out. With Yupo, if you want to remove something, you wait till it dries and you take a Kleenex or a paper towel and you just wipe it right off, and it's clean, unless it's a very staining color like phthalo blue. But you can wash the whole piece of paper completely clean and start all over. I use a lot of salt. The Yupo tends to let the salt do more funky things with it too. It's something.
How do you fix your painting when it's done?
I do seal them. I do spray it, because if I went out in the rain with one of them, it would be gone. So I do have to seal these. But because if you can look at some of these, you can see where like this one was only painted with 2 colors. You drop the color. I paint flat. I can't paint on anything that's it's got to be completely flat, or the colors would just run right off the paper. But I add my water. I pick my colors out. I have a light sketch of what I want to do, and then I drop the colors down, and then I walk away. I come back the next day. It takes sometimes 12 hours, 6 hours, depends on the weather in Tehachapi. I live up in Bear Valley, Tehachapi. And then I see what I have. And from there, then I start working. Well, sometimes I'll layer it again, and I'll layer it again. And then I go in there and I redefine my eyes. And then I spend most of my time with my eyes. A lot of the stuff, kind of the paints will start spreading out, doing their fun little things. So I don't really do that. That's what the paints are doing for me. But I know when to stop, and I know when to add. And that's kind of the secret of it. And then I know what to do with the eyes. I've painted so many eyes. And I know to go in there and I've got to, and it takes me sometimes, it'll take 3 months on one piece because the eyes are dead. I have to keep working on those eyes until they pop. And it just takes one time, a little stroke, and then they come to life. And that makes the whole piece work.
Now, since we're talking on process, talk about who your influences are, especially within the realm of abstract expressionism.
Well, I don't really look, I like all artists, but I guess if I was to look to one artist, Pollock would be a style that how I would paint, because he kind of drops his colors and he responds to what he does, and that's what I do. I respond to what I do. I don't know. I know I'm going to paint a raven, but I don't know how it's going to look. I don't know what the personality is going to be. I respond to my paint. I think Pollock did that too. He kind of dribbled and splattered.
But his was much more about
Abstracting.
Yeah,
Abstract.
and letting the paint do whatever. You have a little bit more restraint.
I do a little bit more, but yeah. But I think
Methodology.
right. My method would be probably but I mean it's completely different finished products, of course. I don't think you ever painted an animal. It's
Well,
like
his early work was representational.
a little bit,
Yeah.
right? But he got famous for his abstracts, his huge abstracts. And I like painting big too. I think when you paint big, it's just as hard to paint a small piece as it is to paint a big piece. Bigger pieces are actually easier. I could spend 6 hours on a little tiny painting and spend 4 hours on a real big one. So,
Now, what about color? This piece obviously is fairly accurate in what you would expect a raven to be painted in, but we have some green and purple and red ravens down the hallway as well. How do you make that decision?
sometimes if the like the Celtic raven, it was kind of with that. Sometimes I just like to throw a different color in there and see what happens. I don't always want to have it exactly. I mean, it's kind of boring after a while when you have all the animals the exact color that it should be. I mean, I have probably 100 black ravens right now in my collection, so they're all different colors. I like to see what the color does, and then because we're playing with abstract, we're playing with your imagination, so let's throw some color in there and push you in another direction too.
So the color never represents anything more than just, kind of playing with color and more process is what it's about.
Sometimes it does.
Yeah.
And each piece, I know that I'll pick my colors out. I know I'm going to work with this blue because I like what it does. But when the piece is finished, is maybe when I come up with a concept of what I'm going to call it. I really don't know until it's finished what I'm going to get. And so a lot of my work is just playing with it. And what I get when I'm finished, I go, well, that looks like an angry raven. I'll name it whatever. Or this has a goofy looking, personality to it. But I go in with just one thing or two things. I know I'm going to start with this color for whatever reason, and I know I'm going to start with this form. And it's very, very basic, and then I start painting it, and I paint a bunch of them. Because when you're painting, you get stuck on one piece. I like to be able to pull away from it and go to something else, and then try to fix that later on when my mind's on something else. Because you can get obsessed with a piece of artwork when you're looking at it. So I've got 6 pieces in the process. I can leave it and go back to something, go to another one that's maybe a little bit further or a little bit not as far along as this one, and it's easier to work with, and this other one's giving me a hard time with the eyes, and then I can come back to it and look at it and I go, oh, that's what I need to do, and I fix it.
Well, until this point, we won't talk strictly about your process and like the technical aspects of your paintings, but we know this is a very emotional process as well for you. This little guy and the muse for this whole series, Peanut, do you want to tell about your meeting of him and how he inspired this body of work?
Well, this is Peanut. She's really young right here. I found her at our park in Tehachapi, and my husband and I were walking her dog. It was the weekend after 4th begging for food. There's no way she would survive more than 24 hours in this park. She was already imprinted by demons. Somebody had banded her. They must have rescued her, took her home, banded her, and thought they could release her into the wild and she would have survived. But she had no clue how to even, get her own food. So I just picked her up. She did not fly. I just picked her up, put her in our truck. I went home and proceeded to research about, did I have a crow? Do I have a raven? It's kind of hard unless you really know these birds. With a lot of research, I figured out this was a raven. I never did find out if it was a female or male because you have to have blood work or until they start laying eggs or maybe. If you look at her right now, you can see the pinkness around her beak. When they're young, they have it. As they grow older, that completely goes away. They have a pink tongue. As they get older, the pink tongue turns completely black. One of the first pieces I did, you can see there's pinkness around the beak and the mouth. That's because that was the first painting I did of her. But she'd be in and out of the studio. She was in and out of her house. She was an amazing little creature. She would drive you crazy, but you'd love her to death. Everything that you read about ravens is what ravens are. They're sneaky, they're devious, they're comical, they're fun, they play, they hide your stuff, they steal your stuff. And it's all there. And when you can watch a raven up close like that, you can get why there's so many artists and writers and folklores that are inspired by these creatures because they're incredibly intelligent. They're said to be as intelligent as a dolphin or an ape. And I believe that they use tools to do things they're thinking. It's a thinking creature. It's when you do something it thinks and it responds to what you're doing. So they're amazing.
I had a lot of fun in preparing for this show, reading about the iconography of the raven. Is there a favorite lore or story that you'd like to share, or artist who's used them for inspiration?
Well, I kind of thought it was interesting that Dickens used, he had a pet raven, and he weaved that raven into his book. That raven died because it was eating paint and paint chips, which, this guy, he got we were painting our house, he got the paint roller around with it too. So they're just that curious. But I thought it was interesting that Dickens' raven inspired Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven. So, the one raven had a lot of influence in her literature. And then also, Gauguin's painted a painting called Nevermore. So, just one raven had a lot of influence in her literature. It's kind of amazing.
All right, well, thank you, Tina. I think we're going to shift more to the Visual Arts Festival and broader conversation here. Just a little bit more about the Visual Arts Festival and how it actually